Party MEP and businessman, and the leader of the Fire Brigades Union, Matt Wrack. They're here to answer your questions. The lines are open now, 0345 6060 973. And you can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk and the LBC Facebook and YouTube feeds.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, millions of the lowest paid workers will receive a pay rise from April, following an increase in the national living wage. It will go up from £8.91 to £9.50 an hour. The Chancellor will make an announcement in his budget on Wednesday. LBC's Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish says it comes following pressure on the government to do more about the cost of living.
The fear is, and this is the concern being raised by opponents of the government, that increase will be quite quickly offset by rising costs and rising bills.
A Facebook employee turned whistleblower has given evidence to MPs telling them the social media giant needs to be regulated. Francis Haugen claims the company unquestionably makes online hate worse, with safety provisions seen as a cost. Facebook has denied the accusations. 8 men aged between 19 and 49 are being questioned over the deaths of 2 teenage boys in Essex. They were among 3 people attacked in Brentwood early on Sunday morning. And the price of petrol's reached an all-time high, with the cost of a litre rising to just under £1.43. Diesel prices are now over £1.46 a litre. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 18 points at 72.22. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.18. LBC weather largely dry overnight, with some showers for the northwest, a low of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lucinda Horsley.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's Monday's Cross Question. Let me introduce my panel to you. We have Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport and Conservative MP for Welwyn and Hatfield. He's joining us by Zoom. Got a nice big Union Jack behind him, as usual. We have Matt Wrack with us, the leader of the Fire Brigades Union. Dame Meg Hillier is Chair of the Public Accounts Committee and Labour MP for Hackney South. And Lance Forman is a businessman and former Brexit Party MEP. The number to call if you'd like to ask our panel a question may be on all the things that have been in the budget. I say have been, because even though it hasn't been announced yet, it seems to have been announced, doesn't it? Rather disgracefully so, in my view, if I may offer an opinion. 0345 6060 973 if you want to put your question to the panel. And as ever, you can watch our proceedings on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk and the LBC YouTube and Facebook channels.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It's Philip in Archway. Hello, Philip.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to ask, should the government repay the money that we have owed Iran for many decades if it will help with the release of Nadim Zadari Ratcliffe and other British people detained in Iran?
Well, it's a very good question, but let's just give the background to this. Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe lost her appeal in an Iranian court, about 10 days, 2 weeks ago. Her husband, Richard, who's very familiar to our audience, has been on my programme several times, he's now started a second hunger strike. And the Iranians contend that the British government owes them £400 million, and that was for some tanks. It's not quite as simple as that, as Grant Shapps will no doubt be able to explain, because it's a terrible situation, and Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is effectively being held hostage because of the money that Iran says Britain owes it, Grant. Should we... Well, I know you're a government minister, so you can't obviously say we should repay the money, because that's not the government's position. But you can understand why many people think that if we did, she would be released.
Yes, as you said, first of all, it's heartbreaking that she is being locked up. There's no justification for it, and we continually call for her release. Secondly, as you already said, actually, this issue with this £400 million is much more complicated than it's often presented. I won't go to all the ins and outs, but the fact of the matter is the two things cannot be directly linked, of course. But we do, broadly speaking, of course, we do want to foster better relations, but we can't do that if there are acts of hostility that continue. For example, with shipping, the area that I'm involved with, makes it more complicated. So look, of course, we're always looking for resolutions, but I think we need to be careful not to tie two completely unrelated issues together.
Matt Wrack.
I think, well, clearly the step of taking hunger strike is something that is extremely worrying, and I'm sure everyone on the panel will be extremely concerned about that and would want to see the government taking every possible step to avoid that and to seek the release. I suppose you can't avoid the issue of Britain's policy towards the Middle East in general. It's unfortunately you end up with individuals caught up in global political issues, in this case around the claimed debts, but also much wider issues of the tensions across the region, and what I suppose we don't want to see individual citizens paying the price for that.
But there's only one group of people to blame for this, and that is the Iranian government. You seem to be saying that it's partly the British government's fault.
Well, no, I'm not remotely defending the Iranian government. I'm no supporter of the Iranian government, and I want to see this resolved satisfactorily.
Meg?
Well, I agree with Grant that it's heartbreaking for the family, and but you really can't connect the two, and it's unacceptable that the Iranian government is trying to do that. Injustice has been done to Nazarene, and I feel really for her family, and particularly her young daughter and her husband here in the UK, having been parted from her for such a long time. But let's be clear as well that it was this Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary that made it worse by suggesting that she had been involved in journalism over there, and that wasn't the case. So it hasn't been as well handled by the government. But I think, in all honesty, any government would find this difficult to resolve with the way that the Iranian government is behaving.
Lance?
I think what you have here is just a personal humanitarian tragedy mixed up with global politics. And as everybody has said, you can't really mix the two. So I think to pay them what they say is due to release is not going to change anything. You're dealing with a regime that is the biggest sponsor of global terrorism in the region, in the Middle East. Their own people aren't free. We want Nazanin to be free. Yes, we could have British people lining up outside the embassy. They could all, protest, go on strike, whatever. But even in Iran, they're not free. They don't respect their own people. They don't respect people. So I just don't think handing over a wad of money is going to solve anything here. I think we just have to campaign as best we can as individuals to the Iranian government. Hopefully, hopefully in time, maybe she will be released. But I can't see it at this moment in time, not with the regime that you have over there.
Does anybody think that more could have been done in terms of diplomacy? Because you've had successive foreign secretaries lobby the Iranian regime. You've had successive prime ministers bring it up with the Iranians when they meet at the UN, etc. But nothing seems to happen. Now, they also have a judicial system, which we might not like, but we wouldn't be very happy if they tried to interfere in our judicial system. That's always a problem, isn't it, Meg?
Well, yes. In fact, many years ago when I was a Home Office Minister, I dealt with the intra-country judicial systems issues and the justice issues. And, you do tread carefully. However, she's had now, 2 sentences on very spurious grounds, and there's no evidence that anyone's seen or would have come out, I'm sure, by now if there had been any evidence. So there isn't evidence that she was involved in the things that she's alleged to be involved in. And they're playing it for, I think, partly for international media effect. And they have made this the headline story to to try and negotiate, but it's not an appropriate way to negotiate if they want the money situation. As Grant has said, I agree with him. We may agree on everything, but on this we do. That is a separate issue, and they have behaved appallingly, and I don't think anyone can accept what they've done to Nazanin.
Philip, thank you very much for your question. A text question now, and if you want to text a question as opposed to ring in, you can do so on 84850. Melissa is in Bristol. Hello, no, I'm not saying it's a text question. Why am I saying hello, Melissa? How are small businesses meant to cope being asked to pay employees more while the economy's going down the pan? You've got quite a large business, Lance. It's not that small, is it? But how will this affect you, if at all?
Well, we are certainly considered to be a small business. We have about 50 employees. We're not a large corporate sort of global player. So we are an SME. And we're a family business, been going for 100 years plus. And it's very frustrating when everything is being thrown at small businesses. Rishi has announced today minimum wages are going up. Our own electricity bill went up 2 weeks ago from £200,000 a year, a huge amount of money, to £350,000 a year. Over 50% increase. It is horrendous. We could employ 6 people for that. It is absolutely horrendous. National insurance is going up. Corporation tax is going to be going up. Everybody is putting up prices now. All of our suppliers are putting up prices. We're having to put up prices. So all you're going to get is inflation. It's going to pass on. So no one is going to be better off. The minimum wage going up isn't going to help people because all the costs are going up. And where I believe the government is getting this completely wrong, yes, we want to be a high wage economy and everyone talks about that. What we really want to be is a high standard of living economy. And there are 2 ways you can attack that. You can either make the wages higher, or you can make the cost of living lower and make the wage that you have got go further. And that way we don't make ourselves globally uncompetitive. And to me, the biggest single problem in this country and the biggest element of that cost of living is housing. It's just way, way too expensive. We're spending, £100 billion on HS2. You could build 500,000 houses for that. That's what we should be doing. Get people's housing costs lower, then their wage goes further, people can afford to live, and we remain competitive. This inflationary cycle, it really worries me. I think it could very easily get out of control. Doesn't help small businesses in the slightest.
Meg?
Well, actually, Lance and I, both East London end of things, we absolutely agree on the housing front. If you are on the minimum wage, you can't afford to pay, certainly you could never afford to pay a private rent. You can't rent a property in Hackney that's 3 or 4 bedrooms on housing benefit, if you need any housing benefit. But let's be clear on the wider point about wages. And, we've actually seen low wages supplemented by the taxpayer through benefits, through housing benefit, and all of those other mechanisms. So that, and this government has cut £20 a week in universal credit, and I've roughly worked out, if you're working full-time, you're not far off that with this minimum wage increase. So the government's taken it with one hand and is asking businesses to pay it with the other. We've seen fuel bills go up, interest rates, inflation, food shortages, petrol now, we're hearing £1.43 a litre. So for a lot of people, there's a perfect
£1.49 where I live.
Well, there you go. Well, yeah. If you live in posh places like that. But these are all real impacts on people's incomes. And I mean, where Lance and I, we might not agree how you get there, but actually it is important that people can afford to live. And at the moment, you just can't afford to live. Even on a minimum wage, actually, council house rents are very difficult. You have to have some subsidy from the taxpayer. That's wrong. Where is it that we've got to in our country that people have to have benefits just to live, just have a roof over their head and pay their basic bills? They're not living in luxury. This is just to keep the basics going. That somehow is wrong, isn't it? We've got the measure of it wrong here.
Matt Wrack, 6.6% rise. That's higher, I think, than has ever been before. But a lot of that's going to be eaten up, isn't it, by other things, as Lance says?
Yeah, look, I have sympathy with the point about small and medium-sized firms, but equally working people need decent living standards. And some people have done very, very well over the course of COVID. You look at the richest people in this society here and across the world, the richest corporations have seen their profits increase, while millions upon millions of people have had to be told to tighten their belts again. So we have a very unfair pandemic. where the so-called key workers, for example, who've kept our economy going, have suffered time and time again. So something needs to be done about that. People do need wage increases. In terms of the housing point, I would agree with the points that have been made, but that needs major public investment. We have, the generation below me, my kids have all lived and gone through the private rented sector, which is an appalling sector of how people are treated by landlords. So actually, we need public investment, in my view, in public housing, where people can. And yes, it would substantially cut across some of the points that Lance made in terms of the impact on living standards. As a young worker today in London, you've got no chance of getting on the so-called housing ladder. As a firefighter in London, you've got no chance of getting on the so-called housing ladder. We have people commuting hours upon hours to serve the people of London, but they can't live in the city in which they work.
Grant Shapps, just a reminder of the question, how are small businesses meant to cope being asked to pay employees more whilst the economy's going down the pan?
Yeah, I was going to bring it back to small businesses, actually, because I think, actually, first of all, we should say a huge thanks to them, because during the pandemic, they were faced with extraordinarily scary times, and actually by and large have managed to stay in business whilst this incredible change to our economy took place. Part of the £400 billion plus support that was provided during the pandemic was £25 billion in cash grants to small and medium-sized businesses, which obviously helped. And as we come out of this, we've got a situation where the world is suddenly waking up and growing. We're seeing lots of pressures, and you've mentioned petrol prices, and there are many others. But we're also seeing salaries going up, which was the heart of the question. Now, they have so far been rising above inflation. I appreciate it's difficult to know when to take the start point of this because of what happened during the pandemic with people on furlough, but we're seeing them so far above. And I'll say this, actually, specifically to Meg's point.
In the private sector, not the public sector.
We welcome the idea that salaries are going up. You take an HGV driver, a lorry driver, the salary will be 15 or 20% higher. Actually, rather than what was happening consistently in the past, which was they were being undercut from cheaper Eastern European labour, and this went on for a decade and more. Instead, we're paying them the proper amount for the job, and we're seeing 1,000 people a day come forward to apply for a provisional HGV driving licence. We can fix a long-term problem by accepting that rather, and here I agree with Meg, rather than paying people in work universal credit, which is where a quarter of the universal credit went to people in work. Instead, it's better to have people earning a proper day's wage for a proper day's work and not having to pay universal credit. So there's quite a lot of stresses and strains as the economy grows. I appreciate that is putting pressure on small businesses, but it's good to see more people in employment now than before the recession, and more job vacancies, at 1.1 million of them, than before the pandemic as well.
Okay, keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. It's 20
Can I make a point about salaries?
This is LBC from Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:23, if you've just joined us, Grant Shapps, Meg Hillier, Matt Wrack and Lance Forman with us answering your questions. Eric in Enfield has another one. Hello, Eric.
Hi, very good evening, panel. Iain. My question is really, do you think Sadiq Khan is cost Labour the next coming election with introducing this unfair ULEZ scheme?
Meg Hillier, I guess I need to come to you first on this. What is the ULEZ scheme for people outside London?
Well, I know what the original one was because it started in my constituency, an ultra-low emission zone. So this is a charge on vehicles that are the most polluting, that cause our air quality to be low. And so that's tends to be older vehicles, particularly older diesel vehicles. And so there are specific years which you bought a car after 2006 or 2000. The difference depends on the type of car. And then under the ULEZ charge, you have to pay £12.50 a day to drive in that zone. That zone today was expanded to include the whole of my borough and further out into parts of outer London, all the way to the edge of Haringey and so on. And that's because there is a very big problem with air quality in London, and this is one of the ways of trying to encourage people to drive cleaner cars. So it could be, some people might think it's anti-car. Actually, it's just anti-pollution.
But this is on top of the so-called congestion charge, which isn't a congestion.
Well, of course, and I mean, you need to talk to Grant about how
I will, don't worry.
How he extended the congestion charge dramatically as part of the deal to support Transport for London. It wasn't a deal to support Transport for London only under Grant Shapps' particular restrictions, and that does mean that drivers will be charged effectively twice for driving in that area if they're in a polluting car. But I do think we've got to look at the long term on this. If you remember, well, I don't remember back to, but the days of the smog in London that they had the Clean Air Act. We have seen problems with clean air, and we should not be going down that trajectory again. We've got to nip this in the bud. And I do think that, though, to be fair to Eric and others, that there has been a bit of a challenge that the car industry and governments over time, and different governments, different hues, have encouraged people to buy types of vehicles. Remember, it was all about diesel a few years ago, and then that's now seen as polluting. So I think that consumer advice has not been good, and we need to support drivers and car owners to move to greener vehicles with the right incentives. And there is a bit of that in this place, but I think we probably need to go further, and I'm sure Grant is going to tell us exactly what the government's doing to support people to buy greener vehicles.
Grant Shapps, let's just stick on this question for a moment. Has this cost Labour the next election by introducing the ULEZ charge? But also pick up the point that Meg made about the fact that you effectively forced Sadiq Khan to extend the congestion charge zone.
First of all, I'll start with the second, if you don't mind. I'm not the mayor. Can't make and I certainly don't want to make the rules for the mayor. The mayor decided to extend the congestion charge.
Well, because you basically made clear that if he didn't accept what you were suggesting, he wouldn't be getting the money.
No, that's not right. What we said was you need to make ends meet. You're asking for a bailout. By the way, I bailed him out to the sum of £7 billion so far. £7 billion.
So let's be clear. The global figures.
Well, no, let Grant give his answer.
I was going to say, the government's provided £7 billion to keep London transport system running. That includes over £4 billion for trains, are called TfL, of course. But his decision to range, extraordinary actually. I'd not heard that before. But his decision to increase the congestion charge, make it 24 hours, keep it running all the time. That is his decision. I can't give him £7 billion and tell him which decisions to make. He got the money to run these different services and then makes those decisions on his own. To the questioners, to the callers' question though, look. I don't approve of the way that he's done this ULEZ charge, this additional sort of wheeling it out to the North and South Circular. I don't think he had the consent of the people fully. He's not given, as has been suggested, a 1-month moratorium. The charge is £160 for breaking it. I mean, if this is not a money-raising scheme, I don't know what it is. And there's worse to come. To answer your questioner's point, I don't know whether anything he's done so far has lost him the next election, given that he only just won one. But he's got another plan, and it's called a boundary tax, or so-called checkpoint Chigwell, that he wants to introduce. And this is in addition to the congestion charge, in addition to the ULEZ, he now wants a boundary tax as well. And if that doesn't lose him the election, I don't know what will.
Meg, you're desperate.
I'm desperate to get back in because let's look. We can bandy around these numbers, but let's be clear. Of course, the government has supported lots of organisations, including transport bodies up and down the country, because of COVID, and over 70% of the money that goes into transport for London's coffers is from fares. That's higher by a long way than any other part of the country. So it's absolutely, and it's the capital city. This had to keep running to get key workers to work. There was no way that Transport for London could have funded that in any possible scenario. It was to suggest it was a free choice of the mayor when there was obviously, look, I watched the value for money, but so I'm always watching taxpayers' money, but it was very much clearly laid out, Grant, as you know, that the congestion charge needed to be extended across the week. There were other suggestions that were floated partly, possibly as Aunt Sally's, to make this seem more palatable, for instance, making it more difficult for pensioners to travel or reducing their free travel and so on. But on the issue of the election, about 110,000 vehicles are caught by this ULEZ, and it is government policy, isn't it, Grant, to improve air quality and to go down these routes. Other cities are doing it. Birmingham's doing it. So I think we've got to look at it in the long term, and actually that is making sure our air quality is good and people are not dying of diseases and their asthma and so on getting worse because of the bad air quality that they're using. And I think the other thing is to monitor this as it goes and see what the impact is, because I think a lot of other cities are watching London to see how it works, and I think it's bold of the mayor to get out there and protect Londoners' health.
Great response,
yes, we
Grant.
want to definitely. I was going to say, we all want to protect health, of course, and we've got this huge shift to electric going on. We've put £2.5 billion into the infrastructure so far, and Meg is absolutely right to say, of course, the problems primarily come from coronavirus. Of course, it'd be stupid to say anything else. However, he had choices. He didn't, because he was grandstanding, the mayor this is, bother to raise the fares on TfL, even when we were having to raise them across the rest of the country. And it cost hundreds of millions of pounds that weren't collected in. And that's grandstanding, and it's fine to do, but then there is a price to pay. He wanted to maintain additional benefits that aren't apparent on, you don't get concessions elsewhere on our transport network. Again, that's fine, but we can't have a situation where the rest of the taxpayer is picking this up. And again, returning to this ultra low emissions zone, £160 without even a moratorium.
Okay.
So let's be clear, it's £12.50 a day.
It's a hell of a lot of money.
No, it's £160 if you don't pay it.
But let's be clear, it's not £160.
We have to go to the news. We'll hear from Matt and Lance in just a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Lucinda Horsley has the headlines.
The Chancellor's being urged to announce more support for small businesses in his budget on Wednesday as he increases the minimum wage. The hourly rate for most workers will go up to £9.50 from April. A Facebook whistleblower has told MPs the social media giant is negligent about safety. Frances Haugen, who used to work as a data scientist at the company, says it's unquestionably making online hate worse. Boris Johnson's spoken to the Russian president ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Vladimir Putin told the Prime Minister he regretted he can't attend because of the COVID situation in his country. LBC weather largely dry overnight with some showers for the northwest, a low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
25 to 9, Grant Shapps, Dame Meg Hillier, Matt Wrack and Lance Forman with us answering your questions. We're talking about Sadiq Khan introducing the ULEZ charge today. Let's read out a couple of texts before I go to Matt and Lance. Somebody says, I will never vote for Labour again. I live approximately a quarter of a mile from the A406. And someone else says, I'm a pretty committed Conservative, but Grant Shapps needs to step up here. With the disaster of LTNs and now the latest congestion charge, Sadiq Khan is killing London, greenwashing and grandstanding from Sadiq, but Grant is standing by and letting him do it. I'm seriously thinking of leaving London after 40 years here. Matt Wrack.
Well, look, I think this needs to be looked at from a long-term and broad perspective about London, but also about all our cities. My kids grew up in East London, and a big feature of their lives was young children suffering with asthma and big concerns in inner London communities about pollution. And, of course, we've had the horrific reports in the first recorded death due to air pollution of a child.
And I think generally the population do think this is an issue. Whenever we do a phone-in on air quality, I remember when I first came to RBC and the producer would suggest doing one and say, really, will anyone phone in on that? The switchboard goes mental.
I think people feel very, very strongly about it. And the truth is we do have to think for the future about how we get around. Equally, within that, we have to think about specific problems that people have. So when the congestion charge came in, I have firefighters in London who because of when they work, have to drive into London, and we had a bit of a battle with the mayor at that point. So we have to be strategic, but we also have to take account of real problems that people will face. The truth is, for me, I think we need far greater investment in genuine public transport in London and across our towns and cities across the UK. If we're going to be serious about tackling climate change, for example, that's where we need to go. We have whole cities. I think Leeds is the biggest city in Europe without a local urban rail system. We need to think strategically about these. I understand the concerns that individual people have, and we have to think about how those can be addressed. But this is a major strategic threat facing all of us and how we function in cities.
Lance Forman.
There's a few things I would say. First of all, I think the timing is absolutely shocking. You know, he's introducing these charges at a time when London is on its knees. The hospitality trade has suffered the worst it's ever suffered. You know, it's a history over the last 18 months. Retail shops are crying out because everyone's going online. It's a really bad time to be doing this. I think, you know, he should have, you know, if he wants to do it, he should wait and see. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, I don't personally believe it really is about greening or being green. It's about raising money and tax raising. Just in the last couple of months, there have probably been half a dozen times when I personally have had to drive into town for meetings. And every single time I've had to drive around half an hour trying to find a parking space. There are there's yellow warning signs there every single...
the underground?
I have meetings in East London. I've got to take samples and things with me. It's not, taking fish on the underground's not such a great idea. But, it's impossible to park. So you're driving around for half an hour, polluting the streets. But I'd say the biggest thing of all is that this is what happens when politicians meddle. Why has this problem happened? It happened because in 2001, Gordon Brown tried to persuade everybody to get diesel cars because they were lower emission on CO2. There were 3 million diesel cars in the UK before that dash for diesel. After it, there were 12 million diesel cars. It was the Labour government, it was Gordon Brown that persuaded everybody we should be driving diesel, and now we're seeing the effects of this. And this happens I'm not just talking about this issue, this happens time and time again when politicians start meddling in our lives. The same thing's just happened. I read something very interestingly about a week ago with single-use plastic bags. They've just worked out that it actually uses 4 times more energy to produce paper bags, and paper bags weigh so much more that transporting them uses a hell of a lot more energy and more pollution than single-use plastic bags. So, everything has a knock-on effect, and I often find with politicians, they only look at the first level. They don't look at all those knock-on effects.
Right, let's change subject completely. Eric, thank you for that. A text from Steph. Could you tell us where you stand on the Qatar World Cup? Should we just shrug it off as another corporate whitewash and enjoy the football for what it is, or not? Grant, let's go to you first on this. I don't know how much of a football fan you are.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of Watford supporter, which might reveal.
Did okay at the weekend.
They did actually. They're up in the Premiership. Most of my life they weren't on and off. But so I'm not a huge football fan. Is actually the answer. I think we all remember when Qatar won that World Cup and the huge disappointment that it didn't come here after what appeared to be a very solid bid. Nonetheless, it is going there. I know football will be played and watched under some quite hot circumstances, I imagine. I think that's probably as far as I can go on it. I don't think there's much.
Well, I think the concern that Steph, I imagine, has is that Qatar is a pretty authoritarian government on all sorts of socially related issues, particularly very hard line on gay rights. Also, that hundreds of foreign immigrant workers have lost their lives in the construction of all the different stadia, and no one seems to be accountable for this. I mean, should we just shrug this off?
No, I don't think it is a question of shrugging it off. And you're right about the lives lost whilst building the stadium. Similarly, when the Olympics took place in, I think it was China, and then they came to London, and you saw, I think, no deaths in the construction of the entire Olympic stadium. So the standards of build, the standards of construction, health and safety, rights in society, and many other things will vary from the norms that we would expect as you travel around the world. And I think that the world decided, or a decision was made, to go play the World Cup there, and that means that is where it is. I don't think anyone's suggesting that. So
is that acceptable? I mean,
send a team.
By the law of averages, probably 2 England footballers are gay. The pressures that they might feel when they go to a country that holds a tournament that restricts their freedoms.
Yeah, no. Look, I've every sympathy, and in fact, you can go around the world and look at sporting locations or business locations or whatever, and actually, in the end, probably decide not to deal with large parts of the world because they don't conform to our social norms here in the 21st century in lots of different ways. I think, though, to answer your caller's question directly, the decision is that's where the World Cup is. I imagine all 4 home nations, the ones that get through, or have got through rather, will send teams. That may just be England at this stage. Someone will have to correct me. And that does mean that
Scotland aren't far off.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Matt.
The trade unions raised this at the time, and as trade unions, we look at the rights of workers here and across the world. I find it a bit rich for a Tory minister to be talking about the standards and rights of workers here in the UK in the construction industry, which is notoriously deregulated and has some of the worst trade union rights in Western Europe. But no, we should not ignore the treatment of migrant workers in Qatar at all. I think it would, and the idea that the government can't do something about this or can't at least say things about this, I think is an abdication of responsibility. Of course, we should be standing up for decency and for decent treatment of the people who build the stadiums, where people are going to then play football, which will be then shown around the world. So I'd ask you to get off your backside and do something and actually stand up for some decent rights for people.
But the only thing that you can do...
I didn't say we shouldn't play, no. But I think we should consider all options, actually.
Meg, I know you're an avid football fan. Not.
Well, we don't have a team in Hackney, so that's my excuse. But actually, we do have some fantastic football course going on in Hackney Marshes, the home of Sunday League football. But look, I think to me the surprise was that it ever got awarded to Qatar in the first place. I mean, let alone all the issues that Matt's raised, and the gay rights issues. But what about the heat? I mean, it's a kind of crazy place to play football, really, when you think about it. We need to get a little bit more realistic about some of that on the impact on the players. But I think there's questions about how the FA and you make these decisions, or the football authorities make these decisions, and what they're looking for. Because when we bid for the Olympics, there's huge requirements. I mean, Hackney MP Lance will remember some of the discussions that were going on because it hit us in East London. We were really involved in the discussions about what was going to happen and what the requirements were. They were pretty stiff from the international
get Lance started on the Olympics.
But there were stiff requirements on what we could do and what we had to promise in order to win the Olympics. So what's going on that there wasn't a proper trade union recognition or a approach to dealing with our overseas construction workers and so on, a set of standards that Qatar had to sign up to. And that's something that we have the power as a country, especially the home of football, we ought to be pushing that hard. And I do.
But we don't have the power, do we? Because it's FIFA that makes the decision.
No, it's FIFA that makes the decision, so not the FA, of course, but FIFA that makes the decision in the end. But they've got a bit to answer for there. But we do have some influence in that body. And I think, as I completely agree with Matt, there's no harm in the government standing up for this. As to whether we should play, I think it's tough on the footballers who've got through to say don't play. I'm not generally in favour of the
particularly when we might be in a position to win the damn thing.
Okay, well, let's hope.
Yes. Pause on that thought for a second. Winning the World Cup, highly unlikely. Money talks. I mean, that's what this is all about. Money talks. And it's amazing how football gets away with so much that I think a lot of regular businesses wouldn't necessarily get away with. Will the world arriving in Qatar perhaps tone down some of the authoritarianism in Qatar? Maybe it will. Things are changing in the Middle East a little bit, in the United Arab Emirates and so on. Things are changing, so maybe positive voices will be helpful. But should our players there be taking the knee for the slave labour that was used for the building all the facilities? We seem to like virtue signalling now, but let's make it pointed and direct it to our hosts.
OK, thank you very much for all your answers on that. We'll come back with another question in just a moment. It's 8:47.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Health Secretary and Conservative MP Sajid Javid. What about COVID vaccines mandatory for NHS staff? Is that to become a law?
It might well do. We haven't made the final decision. We've consulted on it. We've been very open about it. The consultation has just closed. I've yet to make a final decision on this. But
Can I ask which way your mind is?
That's the direction of travel. That requirement is already in place in the care sector. And what we've seen is a surge in the number of care workers that are rightly taking their vaccine.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. From Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 9 minutes to 9. Lazarus on a text says, how can you allow the government minister lady on your show? No. She's actually from the opposition, Lazarus. She's Labour MP, not a Conservative MP, to state blatant lies on the government having power to influence FIFA on the Qatar decision. Her government... not her government, refused to get involved in the takeover over Newcastle by PFI. Utter hypocrisy. Well, you can agree.
Can I just say that? Yeah, no, I mean, I was just saying that any government has some influence because it's got a voice as a national government. I'm not the government, and if I were in government, I hope my party, I'm sure my party would be saying something about the poor rights for workers and other issues in Qatar.
Right, let's move on to another call. It's Jacob in Hendon. Hello, Jacob.
Hi there. So there's a global shortage of HGV drivers, factory workers, warehouse workers, and our service industries are all crippled with staff shortages. We live on an island where we simply cannot magic up new staff. So my question is, why is the government not issuing tens or hundreds of thousands of temporary work visas to help the economy?
Lance Forman.
Well, there are all sorts of supply chain issues at the moment, and staff shortages are one of many issues. And yes, it's a global problem.
No shortage of smoked salmon, though.
Yeah. Definitely not.
Should we try and manufacture one?
Yeah, well, if we talk about... Well, it's actually, you know what, it's really interesting because about a week ago, I was having a chat with a journalist, I won't say which newspaper, a mainstream newspaper, and we were chatting for about 30 minutes about, supply chain issues. And I said, look, we're dealing with them, we're in business, we've had, over the years, you deal with these sorts of things, and we're dealing with them perfectly well. And anyway, she emailed me the next day to say, we're not going to publish your story because you're dealing with it fine. It's good news for you, but our readers won't be interested in good news. And I think, well, why wouldn't you be interested in good news? Businesses do sort of deal with these things. I do have quite a lot of East European staff and staff from other parts of the world as well. And speaking to them and asking them what's happened to their colleagues at other businesses that have gone home and why they've gone home. It's quite interesting, actually. It's nothing to do with COVID. It's nothing to... I mean, they went because of COVID because they were furloughed or whatever and they wanted to be with their elderly relatives. Nothing to do with Brexit at all. What's happened is that when they came here 15 to 20 years ago, the relative value of the job here compared to back home was massive. They could come here, work, earn a fortune relatively, send money home, but they never had a long-term desire to stay here. It was always sort of a 10, 20-year thing. When COVID happened, they went home. They thought to themselves, actually, the wage differential isn't that great anymore. It might be 1.5 times, not 15 times. And they can buy a nice property for themselves, somewhere in the country, get a good job back home, and that's what's happened. So it's, we are in a tricky situation. I just think we should, if people want to come and work, let them work. We should not be closing doors.
Meg.
Well, funnily enough, amazing. I never would have thought Lance and I would agree on this, but absolutely. And I do think we need to train clearly people in the UK to do a lot of these jobs, but that takes time. And we've seen dips, for example, in the nursing profession because the government reduced the number of nursing training places. And so all of these things have an impact now, and you've got to have a long-term thing. So we've got to give people, I think, where there is a shortage, and there's a whole mechanism in government to identify shortage occupations and to suggest to the government that they give visas, but they can't be these short-term ones, come for 3 months and they go home. Who's going to want to do that? People want to come, settle, or have an experience for a few years at least, and maybe have the opportunity to stay longer. And I just think you can't put these false restrictions around something when it's actually about people's lives, or they just won't come in the first place. Because let's be clear, it always happens if, for example, there's restrictions and the word goes out, it's hard to say to come to the UK to study. You see in the newspapers in other countries, Australia and Canada, advertising that you can come and do an English language degree in their country. So there is a global market out there, and we've got to be part of that, and we've got to make sure that people who want to work and where we need those people here, that we get them the chance to do that.
Matt?
Well, we keep hearing, and Grant did it earlier on, trotting out the government's latest mantra that they want to replace low-paid migrant workers with high-paid, high-skilled British labour. But actually, the reality of this government is it has a low-pay strategy. It has its most direct
They're hiding
impact.
It well at the moment.
Well, actually, I'll just take up the point that Grant Shapps made earlier on. The statistics need to be read carefully because what's happened, it depends where you're comparing with. You're comparing with people who were on furlough. If you compared also the fact that large numbers of low-paid workers have left the economy, you're not comparing like with like. And also, you need to be careful about using the word salaries. What earnings are not necessarily the same as salaries. So we haven't seen huge salary increases in the British economy at all. That's not what workers are experiencing. People are working extra hours. People are feeling some bounce back. There has been some limited increase in pay in certain small sectors of the economy. That's the reality of it. We shouldn't fall for what the government tells us. And the area where the government has the most impact is in the public sector, and they've squeezed public sector workers for 11 years, forced down wages in the public sector instead of setting a benchmark of what the labour standard should be and what wages should be in the UK, where they have the most influence. They are actually driving down wages. So,
but if the Prime Minister says he wants a high-wage, high-skilled economy, surely you should be welcoming a sinner that repenteth.
Yeah, absolutely. But it takes some time. What you can't do is go through. I don't accept Lance's explanation that this is nothing to do with Brexit at all. There clearly is a Brexit effect on the labour market, and if we wanted to train people to be HGV drivers, we need to invest in skills. But you can't do that overnight. They've been in power for 11 years. They could have been planning for this high-skilled, high-wage economy for the past 11 years. What have they been doing in that time? The reality for most working people is they are in a very precarious position, worrying how they get from month to month and worrying what happens if that monthly paycheck stops. That's the reality of work for millions upon millions of working people in Britain.
Let's just remind ourselves of Jacob's question. There's a global shortage of workers. Why is the government not introducing thousands more work visas? And there's a text from Ron who says, and this is really, I suppose, aimed at you, Grant, why isn't the government offering the unemployed a chance to get their HGV licences?
Precisely what we're doing. And look, the failed model for all of these years has been to have free movement, allow people to come in, undercut the salaries, so the average salary was lower than people wanted to take up. And as a result, we had a structural, systemic shortage of HGV drivers. And it's gone on for years and years and years. I cannot believe that Keir Starmer and others are making the point that the answer should be to issue yet another 100,000 visas. All it does is prevents people from doing a hard day's work and being paid properly for it. It completely undercuts the market. So what we're seeing now is salaries going up 10, 20%. I was with a milk distributor in my Hatfield constituency, Hatfield part of my constituency, on Friday, Arla. They distribute about 1 in 10 of the milk that goes around this country. And they are paying, get this, salaries of 50, 60, on a certain shift pattern, £78,000 for driving a milk tanker. Now, I want to see a high-skilled, high-wage economy. I know that Mike, has to argue the old sort of tired union position, but really, on the day where the Conservatives have just increased salaries, the national living wage to £9.50 for the first time ever, and coming from a government that's cut personally income tax. So the income tax threshold has risen from 6,750, I recall it was, to over 12.5 grand, putting £4,000 in the pockets of the lowest paid year. It just doesn't stack up.
If you are going to introduce visas to encourage HGV drivers, or indeed from any other sector, what's the point of 3-month visas? How many people have actually applied to come in through that visa scheme? Last time I looked, it was 27.
Yeah, the visas are actually 6 months, not 3 months. And to answer your question, very, very few, because the answer is not to get back into this treadmill of importing and undercutting.
Well, why offer the scheme in the first place then?
Well, actually, funnily enough, we never thought that introducing that doing this was the right way forward. But
well, you did it though. What was the point? Hang on a minute. Well, if you didn't think it was the right way forward, why did you introduce it?
Because the Haulier Association, the Road Haulage Association specifically, were calling for it, and they said that it would resolve the problem. We introduced 25 different measures. It didn't matter which measure we introduce, which, by the way, is having a big impact now because we're getting 1,000 people a day applying to become HGV drivers for their provisional license. It didn't matter which measure we introduced. Along came the haulage associations, and they'd say, "Open up the visas. It's the answer."
Okay.
So you know what?
I don't know why you pander to a trader. Why did you pander to them?
So hold on. We said, well, because actually we don't want to leave any stone unturned. We issued a number of visas. Turns out, actually, it isn't the answer. And so, we've got to get out of this habit.
That's a very strange way to make policy. Lance Forman.
Well, hold on a minute.
I think HGV drivers...
No, hang on.
HGV, you've got a very specific and unique situation there. People have to do it in the UK. But, we talk about wanting to be a high-tech, economy, high-skilled and so on, high wage. Nowadays, most jobs are people sitting at their desks. They don't need to be sitting at their desk in the UK. They could be sitting at a desk in Brazil or South Africa or Bengal or anywhere. And if we keep pushing wages up and up and up, we will find that we will be losing jobs left, right and centre because businesses have to be competitive. And we're talking about a very global, interconnected world now.
I think that this merits a much longer discussion, possibly on another occasion. Final text question from Maureen in Hartlepool. Michael Jordan's 1984 Nike Airship trainers have broken records after selling for $1.42 million. What's the most expensive item of clothing that you have ever bought? Meg Hillier.
Well, it was my wedding dress. I did actually wear it twice.
Did you? Twice?
No, only married.
Twice.
I married once. But I was mayor of a London borough of Islington, and I had to turn up on my first day as mayor to a fancy dinner, and I didn't have that sort of fancy dress, so I just wore my wedding dress. And it was a group of men. How it happened, it was an all-male dinner. Long story. With the Honourable Artillery Company, actually. And so only the chaplain recognised it as a wedding dress, because the others were, both men and very drunk.
So if that was nowadays, you'd boycott that dinner, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, no. I was there in my civic role as a representative of the borough. So I did my duty.
Wrack.
Actually, I think is a dark rain Mac. I do actually go to a lot of funerals.
Well.
I go to a lot of funerals and ceremonial things, and I've had it for 12 years, and I wear it regularly. So I've got
value for money from it.
Got value for money for it. Yeah.
Grant.
I think actually, I don't buy very expensive clothes nowadays. I end up sharing a lot of my clothes with my teenage kids who seem to sort of nick them, and vice versa. Actually, I think probably the most expensive it would also be Nike. In this case, Air Force Ones, which I bought last year and have worn no end. Although
I was lent a pair of those on Saturday, bizarrely. I didn't like them. Lance?
Well, my wife is a huge Darcy Bustle fan, and I bought a pair of her ballet shoes for £1,000. I never wore them. It was a gift to my wife and a donation to the charity.
That's sweet.
All sorts of comments come to mind there. Thank you very much indeed to you all, Grant Shapps, Matt Wrack, Meg Hillier and Lance Forman. Don't forget you can catch up on Cross Question on the podcast or on Global Player. It's 4 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, millions of the lowest paid workers will receive a pay rise from April following an increase in the national living wage. The Chancellor will announce in his budget on Wednesday it's going up from £8.91 to £9.50 an hour. The 6.6% hike is twice